You know, in our political world today, you hear some really strong words getting tossed around. Labels that are designed to grab your attention, maybe even to shock. In this explainer, we're going to get under the hood and unpack the academic thinking behind one of the most powerful and, let's face it, controversial of them all. I mean, just look at this quote from Congresswoman Jackie Spear. When a survivor of something as truly horrific as the Jonestown Massacre uses a phrase like that, it just carries a different kind of weight, doesn't it? It's chilling, and it really makes you stop and think, right? What exactly is she getting at? So, what's behind this? Why do you have experts, survivors, and political opponents reaching for a word as loaded as cult? Now look, this isn't about whether you agree or disagree with the label. The whole point here is to understand the psychological and sociological frameworks that analysts use to even make that kind of argument in the first place. Okay, let's dive in. All right, so to really unpack this, we've got to start where most of these analyses do, inside the mind of the leader. According to psychoanalytic theory, there's a specific personality structure that often lays the groundwork for this whole dynamic. And here we come to a key concept from a leading psychoanalyst, Otto Kernberg: pathological narcissism. And let's be clear, we're not just talking about someone who's a little vain or posts too many selfies. This is way deeper. It's a personality structure defined by this relentless, bottomless need to be admired, a tendency to see other people as tools to be used, and all of it is built on what's described as a pretty shallow emotional life. And what's really fascinating is the theory behind how this all develops. The idea is that in early childhood, the good and bad feelings about yourself don't really merge together. So the mind creates this defense mechanism called splitting to keep the negative, aggressive parts walled off so they don't contaminate the good parts. What emerges from that is this defensive structure, a grandiose self built entirely around this core belief of being special. Okay, so here's the absolute kicker. This grandiose self is actually super fragile. It's not stable on its own. It needs a constant stream of admiration from the outside world just to stay afloat. So from this psychoanalytic viewpoint, that constant craving for attention isn't just a want. It feels like a life or death need. Without that constant praise, the person experiences this terrifying feeling of annihilation, like they're literally going to disappear. And this is where things get even more specific. Kernberg draws a really important distinction. See, when the personality is mainly driven by pleasure-seeking, the goal is pretty simple: just get admiration and attention. But, and this is a huge but, when aggression becomes the main driver, it morphs into what he calls malignant narcissism. And in this case, getting that feeling of admiration isn't just about hearing praise. It's about seeing your followers actively attack and destroy outside groups that you've labeled as worthless or evil. Okay, so we've looked at the leader, but a leader isn't a leader without followers, right? So let's flip the coin and talk about the other absolutely crucial side of this dynamic. All right, so that theory might explain the psychology of the leader, but what about everyone else? What makes people so incredibly devoted, so loyal, that they'll sometimes act in ways that seem to go completely against their own best interests? It's a huge question. Well, according to sociologists who study this, like Alexandra Stein, if you're trying to figure this out using just logic, you're totally missing the boat. The force at play here isn't about rational debate. It's about emotion, it's about attachment, and surprisingly, it's about trauma. The core idea here actually comes from attachment theory, and it's called fright without solution. It's a powerful one. Just imagine this for a second. You're terrified, but the only person you can run to for safety is the very same person or group that's making you scared in the first place. That paradox creates a psychological trap. It's called a disorganized attachment, and it basically makes you freeze up, completely unable to think clearly or rationally about the situation. So you might be asking, how does a leader actually create this state? Well, analysts point to a kind of toolkit, a three-step process. First, you isolate people from their friends, their family, anyone they trusted before. Second, you pump up the fear of the outside world, fear of enemies, fear that everything is about to collapse. And third, you position yourself, the leader, as the one and only safe harbor from the very storm you just whipped up. And the result of all this, it's something called a trauma bond. That's the powerful emotional glue that holds the whole thing together. And when someone's in that disoriented state, their critical thinking just shuts down. Their minds become, as Stein puts it, colonized by the group's way of thinking. They essentially become what she calls deployable agents, ready to act on that ideology. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Because these internal psychological feelings, they don't just stay in people's heads. They can actually get built into the world around us. We're talking concrete and steel. Yeah, the research here suggests that a leader's inner world, all those defenses and needs we talked about, gets externalized. It literally gets built. Their psychology takes physical form. And this tends to show up in two main ways, which are kind of like mere opposites of each other. On one hand, you have bunkers and walls. These are psychologically defensive. They're all about protecting the special good self on the inside from a scary, threatening world on the outside. But on the other hand, you have monuments, and these are psychologically aggressive. They're about projecting that good self outward, making it a giant, permanent symbol of power for everyone to see. So let's break that down. A bunker, that's where you go to get praise in a safe, private space, especially when you feel like your power is under attack. A monument? On the other hand, that's about getting praise forever, for all time. It's what you build when your power feels like it's growing. One protects the self, the other projects the self. And the sources we're looking at point to some pretty striking real-world examples to back this up. Think about Hitler's retreat into his bunker as his entire regime was collapsing. Or analysts point to things like the proposed border wall as a massive defensive structure. And even a place like Mar-a-Lago as a kind of social bunker, a place designed to keep out criticism and keep the admiration flowing. All right, so think about what happens when you put these two pieces together. You've got the leader's psychology on one side and the follower's intense devotion on the other. According to the analysis, this is where the lines can start to get really, really blurry, especially the line between politics and religion. And that combination, a leader who desperately needs praise and followers who are bound by this intense emotional connection, that's what helps explain why some political movements can start to feel so intensely religious, almost like a revival. So what does that actually look like? Well, observers point to a few key things. Rallies stop feeling like just political events and start feeling more like rituals. Your opponents aren't just people you disagree with anymore. They're framed as literally evil. The leader can be seen by some followers as a kind of savior, a messianic figure, and supporters might start to feel like they're on a mission from God, fighting in a holy war. That us versus them mentality gets cranked up to 11.
Okay, so after all that theory, what's the bottom line? What should we take away from this? Well, the sources we've been looking at distill all of this down into a set of patterns, potential red flags you can look for in any leader or any movement, no matter what their politics are.
The sources basically boil it down to 4 key warning signs to look out for. First, listen for rhetoric that constantly puts down and devalues certain groups of people. Second, watch for an obsession with building big, symbolic things, grandiose monuments or huge defensive walls. Third, pay attention to any demand for absolute, unquestioning loyalty. And finally, notice if there's an active effort to cut followers off from outside information, from friends, from family.
And that brings us to the big final question. And this is really something for you to think about. If we understand these patterns, these psychological and social dynamics, can it help us? How do we tell the difference between just passionate, healthy political devotion and a dangerous delusion? Because being able to spot that line, wherever it might be, well, that might be one of the most critical skills we can have.